At a family dinner, my sister Megan leaned back in her chair, smug as ever, and said, "Mom and Dad promised I could live with you." The room froze. My parents smiled like it was already settled. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even put down my glass. I just took one slow sip of water and said, "That's awkward. I sold the house last Friday. A couple already signed the papers." The clink of my glass against the table was the only sound left in that room. I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments or tell me where you're from? I love hearing how far my story reach. It's always good to know I'm not alone in this. Thank you. And now let me tell you everything. And if my story moves you in any way, please consider subscribing to this channel. It helps me keep sharing these hard, personal truths. My name is Ethan Mercer, and this is the moment my family tried to rewrite my life and how I refused to play their game. The chandelier above the dining room table glowed with that soft amber light my mother Margaret always saved for holidays. The china she usually unboxed only at Thanksgiving gleaming under it. The smell of roast chicken and garlic bread wrapped the room like a blanket, but I could feel the stiffness beneath the warmth, like the entire evening was staged. Robert, my father, lifted the champagne bottle and popped the cork with a flourish. Margaret leaned forward, her smile calm, practiced, as if nothing about this setup was unusual. My sister Megan somehow had been seated at the head of the table. Not my father, not my mother, but her. I sat just off to the side, my water glass cold in my hand, my knuckles whitening as I caught every detail, the china, the champagne flutes I'd never seen before, the careful placement of seats. This wasn't a casual Sunday dinner. This was a performance, and I was the unwitting audience. Robert raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he announced. Margaret beamed, nodding toward Megan as if the toast was hers to receive. And then Megan, perfectly calm, slid her announcement into the air like it was already fact. "Next week I'll be moving into Ethan's place in Lakeview," she said, like someone mentioning they were switching gyms or trying almond milk. The table went still. My parents smiled satisfied, as though it had all been prearranged. No one had asked me, not once. My jaw tightened as I remembered the plastic tubs I'd found in my garage 3 days earlier, labeled in big letters, "Megan's winter clothes" and "Megan's books." When I texted her, she'd brushed it off, said it was just temporary storage. Of course, just like her rent checks my parents kept covering, just like every other temporary crisis that stretched into years. I set my water glass down carefully. My hand slid into my bag and pulled out the manila envelope I almost left in the car. My voice was even when I spoke. "I have news too." I placed the envelope in the middle of the table. "I sold the house. Closing is in 45 days. For a moment, no one moved. Then Megan's champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattered across the hardwood. The sound rang through the room like a metal nail dragged across glass. Margaret froze. Robert blinked as if I had just spoken a language he didn't understand. I picked up my phone, swiped to the Pinterest board I'd stumbled on that morning. The title at the top made my throat burn. Megan's new room, a collection of furniture, wall paint curtains, even lamps. I turned the screen to them. "Interesting timing," I said. Their faces faltered. The little secret plan no longer hidden. Robert leaned forward, his voice low but hard. "You can cancel it. There's still a cooling-off period. Call them tomorrow." Margaret's voice shifted into her softest, that tone she used whenever she wanted to undercut me. "Ethan, are you feeling all right? This impulsive streak, it isn't like you. You've been so reckless lately." I slid the papers back into the envelope, snapped it shut. "This isn't reckless. It's final. I did it for my financial health. And that's the end of it." Silence pressed against me, everyone staring as though I had broken the unspoken family contract. And then, from the far end of the table, Helen, my mother's old friend, shifted, gave me the smallest nod. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Someone saw me. I slipped the envelope into my jacket. "We don't share the same definition of helping," I said quietly. Then I turned and left the table to its silence. By Monday morning, my phone had turned into a grenade. I sat at Starbucks in West End, the smell of burnt espresso in the air, my laptop open but unread as call after call buzzed across the screen. Laura, David Kelly, even Uncle Joe. Each one repeated the same line as if they'd rehearsed it together. "Ethan, how could you? Megan's about to be homeless because of you." By lunch, my feed was full. On Facebook, Megan had posted a cryptic note: "Family should be forever, not just when it's convenient. The hardest lesson is finding out who really has your back." Beneath it, 30 comments of sympathy. And there, at the top, my mother's heart emoji and words: "We're here for you, sweetheart. Always." At work in the Soho Arts District office, I was reviewing campaign boards when Grace Lee, my colleague, leaned over my desk. "Hey, Ethan," she whispered, glancing around. "I heard about your sister. If you need help, my church has a housing program for emergencies." Her face was kind, but the sting was sharp. The story had spread beyond family. My reputation was bleeding into my professional life. That evening, trapped in rush-hour traffic along Jefferson Avenue, I gripped the steering wheel, the red glare of brake lights reflecting off the windshield. My phone vibrated again. This time, a voicemail from my mortgage servicer. The robotic voice said, "Mr. Mercer, we received an inquiry from your father, Robert, regarding the rescission period on your recent sale contract. Please be advised we cannot discuss your file with anyone but you." My chest tightened. They weren't just gossiping anymore. They were intervening in my legal agreements. Later at home, I opened my laptop and scrolled back through family messages. A slip in Laura's text revealed a shared drive folder. I clicked it. My stomach turned when the file opened. Megan move-in plan. A checklist complete with notes, and at the bottom the lockbox code where my spare house key was kept. They had been preparing to move her in behind my back, with or without my consent. I closed the laptop, walked to the bathroom mirror. The man staring back had hollow eyes, dark crescents underneath a face drawn thinner from weeks of stress. My hands still shook from the endless accusations, the barrage of calls. In the reflection, I whispered, "They've already decided who I am, the villain, the selfish one." But then I opened the screenshot of the move-in plan, saving it to my own folder. I copied every link, every piece of evidence. My pulse steadied as I thought of the manila envelope waiting on my desk. This time I wouldn't explode or scream. This time I would place every single truth, every single document in front of them. And when I did, there would be no more pretending. The phone buzzed again. Another relative ready to condemn me. I ignored it. In my head, a single thought repeated, like a drumbeat: it's time to put everything on the table. At midnight, the dining table in my Lakeview kitchen looked like a war map, receipts spread edge to edge, bank statements stacked in neat towers, highlighter lines like trench marks. I ordered everything by date so I couldn't lie to myself. March 1st, roof replacement, $12,000, insurance stamped denied because of pre-existing wear. I stared at that word until the letters thinned. April, the city upgraded the main line and my old connection failed. Emergency dig, new pipe landscaping repair, $9,000. June, the furnace gave its last breath during a heat wave, $500 to replace a rebate that barely paid the inspection. I watched the balance in my checking account step down month after month until the numbers were thin as ribs. I picked up weekend work for a realtor, canceled trips, kept a tally of every streaming service I cut every dinner out. I swallowed into ramen and eggs. I slid the piles into labeled folders and carried them downtown in the morning. Rachel Green's office sat high enough that the city looked organized blocks squared off like a spreadsheet. She listened without interrupting, pen-still eyes on me instead of the paper. When I finished, she drew a simple line across a legal pad. Sell now while you have leverage, or wait for the next failure, and sell because you have to. she said. This isn't quitting. It's protecting your future cash flow. She tapped the purchase agreement it already signed. And this is smart. 45-day rent back gives you breathing room. The Lakeview place is pre-approved. You're not leaping without a net. I hated how relieved I felt when someone called my decision reasonable. It won't matter to them, I said. They've already written the story. Then write yours better, she replied. Present it like a clean case. Dates, costs, contracts. No apologies, no accusations. People can argue feelings. They stumble on facts. Back at the table that night, I built the case. One binder for invoices, one for statements, a single-page brief on top with bullet dates, totals, contact names at the mortgage company, the clause that spelled out the rent back. I kept my sentences spare and bloodless. I didn't describe the nights I sat under a bucket catching roof drips while running numbers that didn't add up. I didn't mention how I'd stood in the dark kitchen wondering what else in this house was waiting to break. I stuck to what could be photocopied. On the bookshelf, a frame leaned behind paperbacks, a photo the realtor took 9 years ago. Me on the porch with the key held too high, grin too wide, pride like sunlight. I lifted it and felt the edges bite my palm. I wanted to be angry at that kid for believing a house could be a fortress against hurt, but he'd given me something truer proof I could build a life from zero. If I'd done it once, I could do it again. I slid the photo into the front pocket of the binder, a quiet amulet. Outside, the July night in Seattle was dry and cold in the parking lot beneath sodium lamps. I stood where the future loft would be, stared up at the dark windows, and imagined light pouring through them in the mornings, a smaller mortgage scrolling across my budgeting app in calm green numbers. For the first time in months, my chest loosened. I texted Jake, "Can I borrow your truck the last weekend before closing?" He sent back a thumbs up and a time. Then I messaged Helen. "This week I need advice that isn't financial." She replied with a place and the words, "Proud of you for choosing yourself." Back home, I wrote the one-page brief for the relatives. March roof, April water line, June furnace. Total outlay to date. Emergency fund depleted. Decision made to prevent a forced sale. Contact at mortgage servicing added for any procedural questions. A final line. This is my responsibility and I'm handling it. No blame, no pleading. I printed 10 copies, 3 hole punched, clipped them to the front of the binders. I stood a long time considering how much to reveal when we met, whether I would tell them about the nights I woke with my heart beating too fast, about the way the kitchen felt, like a mouth swallowing me whole. I decided I would show them only what mattered: paper ink signatures. I placed the photo of me with the key inside the cover, shut the binder, and taped the last moving box closed while the neighborhood slept. The rip of the tape sounded like a curtain drawing. Saturday afternoon heat pooled in the door frame when the front door swung wide and my parents walked in with Megan behind them. No knock, just the confidence of people returning to a place they believed was already theirs. The living room was a maze of labeled cartons. The air smelled like old newsprint and fresh tape. Robert didn't stop to look around. He went straight to the center of the room, planted his feet. "Ethan, you can't sell," he said. "This will tear the family apart." Margaret's gaze slid over the stacks as if she were inventorying the damage. "Look at you," she murmured. "This isn't like you. You're acting off. I'm worried." Megan crossed her arms. "You sold the house to punish me," she said. "You've never wanted me to have any stability." I kept packing. I didn't offer them a seat. I didn't pour water. I set a stack of plates in a box and cushioned them in newspaper. "I don't need permission," I said. "It's my decision." Megan's tote swung against her hip when she shifted. The zipper flashed open and I saw the thin black case I used for the lockbox key, the same worn stitching. My mouth went dry. I reached out and before she could step back, I lifted it from the bag. The weight in my hand was familiar. I snapped it open. My spare key lay inside the tag with the code taped to it. I looked from the key to their faces. "Who told you to take this?" I asked. No answer. Robert watched the floorboards. Margaret toyed with her bracelet. Megan pressed her lips together as if the right pose might make it acceptable. I set the key down hard on the coffee table. "This is my home until closing. You don't move anyone in here when I'm not home. You don't plan around me like I'm a storage unit." Robert cleared his throat. "I called your mortgage company," he said, too casual. "They said you can rescind. There's still time." The room tilted a little. I steadied myself on the back of a chair. They hadn't just assumed ownership, they'd tried to undo my signatures. "You don't get to do that," I said. "You don't get to insert yourself into legal documents because you don't like my choices." Margaret stepped toward me, voice dipped in that concerned sugar. "Honey, stress can make people rash. Maybe you should talk to someone just to make sure you're okay. Selling your home out of nowhere isn't healthy." I sealed another box and wrote "Books Office" across the top. "I need to sleep without worrying which bill is going to punch me in the face next," I said. "I need a life that doesn't require a bailout every quarter." "That's healthy," Megan scoffed. "You're making me the villain." "You and I both know what's been happening," I said quietly. "But this isn't about you." I met my parents' eyes one by one. "For the first time, you're going to hear what I need, not what she needs." Me. No one moved. Dust motes wobbled in the strip of late light falling across the floor. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked. I could feel my pulse in my wrists, but my voice held steady. I picked up the key case, slid the spare into my pocket. "If anyone enters this house without me again, ill-treat it like what it is I said. This is still my home until the documents change hands. I won't say it twice." Robert lifted a hand as if to object, then let it fall. Margaret looked older than she had an hour before. Megan stared at the space where the key had been, like she could still will it back. I walked to the window and pulled the cord. The blinds rattled down and the room fell into a softer light. I turned back to my boxes. The tape hissed as it laid another clean line across cardboard, the sound of boundaries setting in place. By Tuesday night, my dining table in Lakeview looked less like a place for dinner and more like a courtroom bench. The binders were stacked neatly, the one-page summary clipped on top, and the photo of me holding the house key 9 years ago lay at the center like a silent witness. When the knock came, I felt my pulse rise, but I stayed standing at the head of the table, not waiting for anyone to grant me authority. They filed in with the choreography of a jury, my father, Robert, jaw tight. My mother, Margaret, her smile already trembling with disapproval. Megan, arms crossed, certain of her role as the victim. Laura came with her husband, David Kelly, trailed behind their faces, primed to judge. But on my side of the table, Helen settled in with quiet steadiness. Rachel Green carried a folder of her own, and Jake leaned back in his chair like he was ready to bear witness. I didn't sit. My palm pressed against the top binder as I spoke. "If this is going to be a trial, let's at least agree to evidence." One by one, I laid the papers in the middle. The invoice for the roof, $12,000. The water line repair, $9,000. The furnace replacement, $500 even. I slid them across the polished wood. "These are the facts." Megan leaned forward with a sharp laugh. "You're good with numbers, Ethan." "Always have been. But anyone can fake a sheet of paper." Before I could answer, Rachel opened her folder and pulled out a copy of the roof warranty and contractor's signature. She slid it forward. "Independent confirmation," she said simply. Megan's smirk faltered. David's voice cut across the silence. "Megan, where are you working right now?" He tilted his head. His question wasn't cruel, but it hit like a hammer. I'm exploring options," she muttered, eyes down. Laura jumped in quickly as though to shield her. "Well, Ethan's house isn't the only option. David, you have a guest room, don't you? Maybe Megan could stay there instead." The table turned, eyes shifting. For once, the assumption that my house was the inevitable solution cracked. Helen folded her hands on the table. "I've watched this family for 2 decades. she said softly. Ethan bought that home with no help. Megan has had more than one bailout. The words hung heavier than any accusation, because they came not from me but from someone who had nothing to gain. Jake leaned forward, his voice quiet. My brother lived with my parents until he was 42. They paid his rent, his car, his credit cards. When they died, he couldn't survive. He lost their house within a year. He let the words settle. That wasn't love, he said quietly. That was sabotage dressed up as kindness. I looked down the length of the table at my parents, at my sister, at all the watching eyes. This isn't punishment, I said. This is protection for me, for her. She deserves the chance to stand. The silence was thick, broken only when Megan shoved back her chair, eyes wet, her voice rising. You're all against me. He's always been the favorite. She stormed out the door, slamming hard enough to shake the frames on the wall. The echo still lingered when David cleared his throat. We need a financial plan for this family, he said. It can't all land on one person's shoulders. I looked at him surprised, and for the first time I felt the ground shift. For once, the scales were not tilted against me. When the chairs scraped and the gathering dissolved, I stayed standing at the head of the table. The manila folder lay closed now, but I didn't feel small or cornered or villainous. I felt steady, stronger than I had in years. The slam of Megan's door still vibrated in my bones, but beneath it was something new, the unmistakable sense that the power was beginning to move. The rain had been falling all afternoon, a thin mist that dampened the sidewalks of Seattle and left the Lakeview steps slick under my shoes. I had just sealed the last of the boxes when the pounding on the door came fast, insistent. When I opened it, my parents and Megan stood there, faces rehearsed in a strange mix of smiles and sorrow. They came inside without waiting, settling on the sofa like they owned the place. I stayed standing, arms crossed, tape dispenser still in my hand. Margaret began first, her tone low and coaxing. Ethan, we've thought about it. If you don't want Megan living here, we understand, but maybe you could help her in another way. Robert nodded, sliding in behind her. It wouldn't take much. Just first and last month's rent, nothing that would touch your savings. Megan leaned forward, eyes glistening with practiced vulnerability. I only need a push, Ethan. No one else can give it to me. Only you. I watched them, and in the pause I saw the edges of the trap. No number, no ceiling, just a little help. The kind that becomes a rope pulling forever. I reached for the envelope tucked in the stack beside me and set down a letter on the table. This is my pre-approval for the downtown Seattle loft, I said evenly. My mortgage there will be 35% less than here. Every dollar I've got is committed to rebuilding my emergency fund. That's why I can't give more. Robert picked up the paper. His eyes flicked to the line with the projected monthly payment. His face for once cracked. He hadn't expected to see numbers smaller than his own assumptions. Margaret tried a new tack. If you can't give her money, then at least co-sign. Just stand as guarantor on her lease. It doesn't cost you anything. I shook my head slowly. I'm not a bank. My name isn't collateral for someone else's choices. I pulled a card from my pocket and placed it on the table. The logo of my company gleamed faintly. But there's something else. Our marketing department has an opening entry level. HR is willing to interview Megan next week. It's a real salary, I added, a path she can build herself. The room went quiet. Megan stared at the card, her lips parting for a second before she caught herself. I don't need your charity job, she spat, but her voice wavered. I met her eyes. It's not charity. It's an opportunity. What you do with it is your choice. The rain tapped harder against the window. Robert folded the pre-approval letter, his thumb dragging down the margin, silent now. Margaret looked away, her hand resting tight on her knee. Megan rose, brushing past me. her chin lifted too high to be real. But as she turned, I saw her glance at the card again, eyes flicking like a hand caught between stealing and surrender. When the door closed behind them, I leaned against the wall. The house smelled of cardboard and dust. But something else lingered, a thin current of hope that maybe for the first time the fight was not just about what I refused to give, but about what I had offered instead. The card still sat on the table edges, damp from her fingertips. I left it there knowing she'd remember it when the noise around her quieted, when the masks of entitlement slipped. And for the first time since the war began, I felt the tide shift toward choice, not demand. The dining table was bare except for my laptop and the thick folder I had left unsealed. The rest of the house was packed into boxes, the walls pale where frames had hung the air faint with cardboard and tape. I had invited them to come not to debate, but to witness. When Robert and Margaret walked in with Megan trailing behind, there was no pretense of warmth this time. They sat stiffly, eyes narrowed, as if bracing themselves for a blow. I opened the folder, pulled out the spreadsheet I had spent hours formatting, and slid it into the center of the table. The rows were clean, the totals bold and red. I turned the page so it faced them. "Here's the truth," I said. They leaned closer. Each line item glared from the paper. $7, $800 for the car, $14, $500 for rent on 3 separate occasions, $6, $200 for credit card debt, more than $10,000 in scattered emergency expenses. The total $42,000 over the last 5 years. Margaret's breath caught. She pressed her hand to her mouth, whispering, "My God, we've spent that much." Her face crumpled at the number, stripping away the illusion of generosity without consequence. Robert's jaw tightened. "We did it because we love her." "You can't put love into a ledger, Ethan. Numbers don't define family." I kept my voice even. "This isn't love. This is dependency. You told me when I thought about dropping out of college that I had to learn to stand on my own feet. Why doesn't Megan get the same rule?" Megan slammed her fist on the table. "You're cruel. All I've ever wanted is a chance." Her voice shook the walls. I didn't argue. I simply slid the business card toward her again. "There's your chance, a job interview, not a handout." Her face burned red, but she didn't push the card away. Then I pulled out one last sheet, a comparison chart. 2 columns side by side. On one side projected, if I continued supporting her emergency savings gone in 2 years, no buffer left, a constant cycle of debt. On the other side projected if I protected my finances, reduced housing costs, stable savings growth, a path to independence. "These aren't opinions," I said. "This is math. Math doesn't lie." Margaret broke, then tears streaming down her face. She turned away, unable to watch. Robert's hands balled into fists on the table, but his mouth stayed shut. For the first time in years, he had no words left to counter me. The silence stretched. I gathered the sheets, clipped them back into the folder, and closed it. As they stood to leave, I caught it, a small movement, almost furtive. Megan reached across the table and slipped the business card into her purse. She thought no one noticed. But I did. And in that small act, I knew the weight had shifted. The power no longer lived entirely in their expectations. It lived in the choice she now carried with her. The night before closing, the house echoed with emptiness. Every box was stacked in the truck outside. Every nail hole stared back like a scar. Every footstep rang off bare wood. Lakeview had never felt so hollow, but also never so honest. This was no longer a home. It was a shell waiting to be handed over. When the door opened one last time, I wasn't surprised. My family stepped into the vacant living room as though summoned shadows cast long across the floor by the single lamp still burning. Robert looked around, his eyes caught on the stripped walls. His voice cracked in a way I had never heard. "You're really walking away from this house?" I met his gaze. "Am not walking away. am choosing to save myself. Then Megan broke. She dropped to her knees, clutching my leg, tears streaming down her face. Please, I can't do this on my own. Don't abandon me. Don't leave me behind. The sound of her sobbing pulled at something deep in me, but I steadied myself. I bent down, lifted her by the shoulders until she stood. Into her hand I pressed the business card one final time. You're not being abandoned, I said softly. You're being given a choice to stand to prove to yourself you can. What you do next, that's up to you. Margaret's sob caught in the air. She looked at Megan, then at me, her voice breaking. We thought we were helping, but we weren't. We were making her weaker. She turned to Robert, eyes wet, waiting. For a long time, Robert said nothing. Then slowly he placed his hand on my shoulder. His voice, when it came, was the same one I remembered from years ago, the night I nearly dropped out of school. We don't help by making everything easy. The words returned to him now, sounding like a verdict. Megan's hand closed tight around the card. She didn't look up, but her knuckles whitened as she held it. For the first time, her eyes didn't burn with defiance, but flickered with something new, an uncertain spark of determination. I looked around the empty room. The faded rectangles on the wall where photos once hung, the marks on the floor from years of furniture dragged back and forth, the faint smell of paint and dust. My chest ached with loss, but underneath it beat something steadier, freer. I walked to the door, key in hand. They followed in silence as I turned the lock. The click was sharp, final, echoing through the hollow house. I didn't look back. 1 week after I left Lakeview, we gathered again at my parents' house in Maplewood. The dining room was the same one that had seen so many battles, the chandelier light, the polished oak table. But tonight there was no champagne, no holiday china, just plain plates and a silence so heavy it pressed against my chest. Everyone knew this was not dinner. It was reckoning. I had brought the folder with me, the one that had traveled from my kitchen table to every confrontation. I set it down between us, took a breath, and opened it. I'm not here to argue feelings, I said. I'm here to show facts. One by one, I spread the documents across the table. The roof repair, $12,000, denied by insurance. The water line, $9,000. The heating system, $5,500. Bank statements showing how each emergency carved into savings until there was nothing left. My voice stayed even. These aren't excuses. These are the reasons I sold. Then I slid forward 2 photos, one of the lockbox I'd found tampered with and the email from my mortgage servicer confirming someone had called asking about cancellation. This was your plan behind my back. Margaret lowered her eyes, her fingers tightening on the edge of her napkin. Robert's jaw clenched so hard the muscle jumped in his cheek, but he didn't deny it. I pulled out the spreadsheet, the one with the red total glaring from the bottom. $42,000. 5 years. Every bailout, every rent payment, every credit card rescue. This is what enabling looks like. This is what's been draining us. No one spoke. The numbers spoke for themselves. Then came the side-by-side projection sheet. 2 columns, one showing the future. If I continued supporting Megan's savings, gone emergency funds drained a slow spiral into debt. The other showing if I protected my finances, stability, security, a chance to breathe again. I didn't read it aloud. I just turned the paper so they could see with their own eyes. I've been called selfish. Cold, uncaring, I said quietly. But this is all I've done. I've fought to hold on to my own life. I've refused to keep drowning so someone else could stay afloat. For a moment, the silence hummed like electricity. Then David, the uncle, who had always been the most critical, leaned forward. His voice was steady, decisive. It's time for a family financial plan. Megan needs to take responsibility. Ethan cannot be the only one carrying this weight. The words landed like a verdict. Margaret's tears slipped down her cheeks, but there was no edge in them now, no weaponry, just sorrow. Robert folded his hands together, staring at them as if they held all the answers he no longer had. Megan sat with her head bowed, fingers wrapped tight around the business card in her lap. I closed the folder with a sharp snap. This is the last time I'm putting everything on the table. If you still want to call me the villain for protecting myself, I said, he'll wear the name, but I won't change my decision. The room stayed silent. For the first time, I didn't fear that silence. I owned it. 3 months later, my life looked different. My loft in downtown Seattle was bright and wide-open sunlight pouring through tall glass windows onto polished concrete floors. The rent was lower, the bills manageable. For the first time in years, my budget balanced green instead of bleeding red. On the kitchen island sat my new camera, a dream I had put off for nearly a decade. Now it was mine. That Sunday evening, I hosted dinner. The table was smaller, the food simpler, but the atmosphere was lighter than any Maplewood gathering I could remember. Robert and Margaret arrived carrying a casserole, but instead of side glances or unspoken expectations, they asked about my photography class. Robert leaned in with genuine interest when I showed him a few shots from my first assignment. Margaret smiled, not at Megan alone, but at both of us. Then Megan came through the door. She wasn't dragging boxes or asking for rent money. She carried a business card of her own. Assistant Marketing Coordinator. It read in neat print. She laughed softly, a little embarrassed. Mostly coffee runs and filing right now, she said. But am learning. For the first time, pride, not defensiveness, colored her words. We sat together at the table. At one point, she opened her laptop, her hands slightly shaky as she tapped numbers into a calculator. If I put aside 15% of every paycheck by January, I'll have enough saved for first and last month's rent on my own place. I glanced across the table. Robert and Margaret exchanged a look, then nodded quiet approval. Not offers to cover the gap. It was a change so subtle yet monumental. Helen raised her glass. To homes that shelter us and boundaries that protect us. We clinked glasses, a sound warm instead of sharp. Later, as plates were cleared, Margaret spoke quietly, almost to herself. We should have done this long ago. We thought we were helping. We didn't see we were hurting both of you. Her voice trembled, but the admission was real. I stepped out onto the balcony afterward, Seattle's lights sprawling beneath me like constellations scattered across the earth. The air was cool crisp, carrying none of the suffocating weight that had filled my Lakeview nights. Behind me, laughter spilled out of the Loft family, both chosen and blood learning to exist on new terms. I rested my hand on the railing, letting the city hum steady in my chest. For the first time in years, I felt both free and connected. Maybe family doesn't always understand us. Maybe they fail us, wound us, even betray us. But when we draw the line and hold it firm, we don't just save ourselves, we give them the chance to change too.